I'm Diana, 34 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I signed away everything I had to my soon-to-be ex-husband. The five-bedroom house, both cars, the real estate company, all of it. My lawyer begged me not to do it. My mother-in-law smirked from the gallery seats. Brittany, my husband's 27-year-old mistress, actually took a selfie right there in the courtroom. And Vincent, the man I once thought I'd spend my life with, smiled like he'd just won the lottery. But that smile disappeared exactly 47 seconds later, when his lawyer finished reading the final clause in our agreement. Before I tell you what happened, if you find this story worth hearing, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to. And if you're watching right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're from and what time it is there. Now, let me take you back 3 years, to the night I accidentally opened the wrong drawer in Vincent's office. 8 years of marriage, that's how long I spent building a life with Vincent Saunders. From the outside, we had everything. A sprawling colonial house in the suburbs of Houston with 5 bedrooms we didn't need. A Porsche Cayenne in the garage for him, a 12-year-old Honda Accord for me. Dinner parties where Vincent held court while I refilled wine glasses. The perfect American dream, if you squinted hard enough and didn't ask too many questions. Vincent controlled everything about our finances. "I'll handle the money, you handle the house," he told me on our honeymoon. And I, young, in love, desperate to avoid the kind of fights that destroyed my parents' marriage, agreed. Before Tyler was born, I was a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. I was good at it. Numbers made sense to me in a way people sometimes didn't. But when I got pregnant, Vincent sat me down with that reasonable tone he used when he'd already made a decision. "The baby needs his mother at home. I make enough for both of us." So I quit. Traded spreadsheets for sippy cups, client meetings for playdates. And when Tyler started kindergarten and I picked up part-time remote accounting work to keep my skills sharp, Vincent barely noticed. To him, I was furniture. Useful, present, and utterly unremarkable. He'd check his Rolex Submariner, a gift to himself for closing some deal, and announce he had investor meetings that would run late. His home office stayed locked. The credit card statements went to his email. I had a supplementary card with a modest limit. Everything else was his domain. What I didn't know then, but would soon discover, was that his Rolex was bought on credit and his empire was built on sand. Tyler changed everything for me. My son came into the world 6 years ago with his father's dark hair and my stubborn chin, and from the moment the nurse placed him in my arms, I understood a kind of love I'd never known existed. Fierce, unconditional, the kind that makes you lie awake at night wondering if you're doing enough, being enough. Vincent saw Tyler differently. Our son was a legacy, not a relationship. Something to mention at business dinners. My boy's already showing an interest in real estate, can you believe it? But never something to nurture. Vincent missed Tyler's first steps because of a conference call, missed his first word because he was traveling, missed every single school play, every parent-teacher conference, every bedtime story. I remember one evening, about a year ago, Tyler had been waiting by the window for 2 hours, his favorite picture book clutched against his chest. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming home? He said he'd read to me tonight." I texted Vincent. No response. Called. Voicemail. Tyler fell asleep on the couch, still holding that book. When Vincent finally walked in at 11, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his usual, I asked if he'd forgotten his promise. He barely looked up from his phone. "I'm building a future for this family, Diana. Tyler will understand when he's older." But I saw my son's face the next morning when he realized Daddy had come and gone without even saying goodnight. That was the night I realized something had been wrong for longer than I wanted to admit. Vincent hadn't hugged Tyler in 3 months, hadn't asked about school, about friends, about anything. Our son wasn't a priority. He was an afterthought. The night I found out the truth, I wasn't even looking for it. 3 years ago, Tyler had a school field trip coming up, and I needed his passport for some reason I can't even remember now. Vincent usually kept our documents in his office, But that night he'd left for one of his late meetings and forgotten to lock the door. I found the passport easily enough. Top drawer, right where he said it would be. But as I pulled it out, my hand brushed against a folder I'd never seen before. The return address on the top envelope made me pause. First National Bank. Final notice, stamped in red. My accountant's brain kicked in before my wife's heart could stop me. I opened it. 90 days past due. $340,000 outstanding on a commercial property loan. I opened another envelope. Wells Fargo. Delinquent account. Immediate action required. Then Chase. Then a letter from a collection agency I'd never heard of. By the time I finished going through that drawer, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. Vincent's empire was hemorrhaging money. The properties he bragged about at parties were underwater. The company that was supposed to be our retirement was drowning in debt. Over $2 million. And he'd never said a word. I sat there in his leather chair for a long time, the papers spread around me like evidence at a crime scene. Then I did something that surprised even myself. I took out my phone, photographed every single document, time-stamped, dated, crystal clear. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, turned off the light, and walked out. I didn't sleep that night, but I wasn't scared anymore. I was calculating. The next morning, I made a phone call to someone I trusted more than anyone, my college roommate Rachel Morrison. Rachel worked at a regional bank. We'd stayed close over the years, the kind of friendship that picked up right where it left off no matter how long between conversations. She was also the only person who'd ever looked at Vincent and said, "I don't know, Di. Something about him feels off." I should have listened to her then. I was listening now. "I need to run a credit check," I told her, "on myself. And I need to understand what debts might be attached to my name as a spouse." Rachel didn't ask why. She just said, "Come to my office tomorrow. Bring your ID." What I learned over the following weeks confirmed my worst fears and revealed something unexpected. Most of the debt was in Vincent's name alone, or tied to his company. But he'd taken out 2 loans using both our names without my knowledge. Forged my signature, or used an electronic version I'd never authorized. "This is fraud," Rachel said quietly, showing me the paperwork. "You could report him." "Not yet." I folded the copies she'd made and slipped them into my purse. "I need to know the full picture first." And so began my 3-year education in financial survival. I opened a savings account at a different bank, one Vincent had no connection to. Every month, I funneled what I could from my part-time work. 200 here, 300 there. I documented everything, saved every email, every statement, every scrap of evidence that crossed my path. Rachel checked in periodically with updates. "The debt's growing, Diana, not shrinking." I wasn't surprised, but I was ready. Vincent had no idea his wife was watching and waiting. A year ago, Vincent started coming home smelling like someone else. It wasn't obvious at first. A hint of perfume that wasn't mine, a text notification he'd silenced too quickly, business trips that seemed to multiply overnight. But I'd spent 3 years training myself to notice everything, and Vincent had grown careless with a wife he considered beneath his attention. The late nights became later. The investor dinners more frequent. He upgraded his wardrobe, $3,000 Tom Ford suits charged to credit cards that were already maxed, while I still wore dresses from 5 years ago. "You should put more effort into your appearance," he told me one evening, adjusting his new silk tie in the hallway mirror. "Brittany, she's a new business associate. She always looks put together. Professional women understand the importance of presentation." Brittany. The name he said too casually, too often. I didn't confront him. What would be the point? I already knew our marriage was a facade. I just needed to know how long I had before the facade crumbled completely. One night, Vincent left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. The screen lit up. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Wear the blue tie I like. XOB." I didn't touch the phone. Didn't need to. The preview told me everything. That same week, I noticed him deleting his browsing history, changing passwords, making calls from the garage where he thought I couldn't hear. But here's what Vincent never understood about me. I wasn't plotting revenge. I wasn't consumed by jealousy or heartbreak. I'd made my peace with who he was long ago. I was simply gathering information, building my case, waiting for the moment when he would finally show his hand. That moment came sooner than I expected. The first time I met Brittany Lawson, she was wearing a knockoff Birkin bag and Vincent's arm around her waist. It was his mother's birthday dinner, a monthly ritual at Evelyn Saunders's pristine colonial in River Oaks, the kind of house where the silverware matched and the help knew to be invisible. I'd been attending these dinners for 8 years, always feeling like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. That night, Vincent walked in with Brittany like she belonged there. "Everyone, this is Brittany. She's been consulting on some new investment opportunities for the company." She was 27, all blonde highlights and practiced smiles. Her dress was designer, or designed to look designer. I'd spent enough years auditing luxury goods to spot the tells. The stitching on her bag was uneven, the hardware slightly off color, but no one else noticed. They were too busy fawning. "Vincent finally found someone with ambition," Evelyn announced, squeezing Brittany's hands like she was welcoming a long-lost daughter. Then she glanced at me with that thin smile I'd grown accustomed to. "Diana, be a dear and help Maria bring out the appetizers." I spent that dinner in the kitchen and the margins, watching my husband parade his mistress in front of his family, while they pretended not to see what was obvious. Tyler sat beside me, confused. "Mommy, who is that lady? Why is she sitting in your chair?" "She's nobody important, sweetheart." Brittany laughed at something Vincent said, her hand lingering on his sleeve. I watched Evelyn beam with approval, and I thought, the bag isn't the only fake thing at this table. But Brittany wasn't my enemy. She was a symptom. The real threat was the man she didn't know was already bankrupt, in more ways than one. 6 months before the final hearing, Vincent sat me down at our dining table and delivered the news like he was announcing a quarterly earnings report. "I want a divorce." No preamble, no apology. Just 5 words dropped between us like a contract termination. I'd known this was coming. Had prepared for it, planned for it, almost welcomed it. But hearing him say it still felt like a door slamming shut on a decade of my life. "I see," I said. "What are you proposing?" Vincent leaned back, his expression the same one he used when negotiating with people he considered beneath him. "I want the house, the cars, the company, everything we built. I'll be keeping it." "And what about me?" He shrugged. "You can keep Tyler. I'm not interested in custody battles. The kid would slow me down." The kid. Our son. 6 years old, innocent, adoring, and his father couldn't even be bothered to use his name. "You're sure?" I kept my voice steady. "You want everything? All the assets? All of them. Every property, every account, every share." Vincent smiled, clearly pleased with his own generosity. "I'm being reasonable here, Diana. Most men in my position would fight you for the child too, just to avoid support payments. I'm letting you walk away with something." Something? My son. Like Tyler was a consolation prize. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw exactly what he saw when he looked at me. Nothing worth fighting for. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll need some time to review everything." Vincent's eyebrows rose. He'd expected tears, maybe. Bargaining, not compliance. "That's reasonable. I'll have my lawyer send over the paperwork." What he didn't know was that I'd been waiting for this moment for 3 years, and I was ready. The first meeting with Vincent's lawyer happened in a corner office downtown, all glass walls and leather chairs designed to intimidate. Gerald Hoffman was a silver-haired partner at one of Houston's most aggressive family law firms, the kind of man who charged $600 an hour and looked at opposing parties like they were problems to be eliminated. Vincent had clearly chosen him for exactly that reason. I came alone, no lawyer, just me and my 5-year-old Blazer, sitting across from two men who clearly thought the meeting was a formality. "Mrs. Saunders," Gerald began, sliding a thick folder across the table. "My client has prepared a comprehensive proposal for the division of marital assets. Given the circumstances, we believe this is more than fair." I opened the folder. Pages of legalese detailing how Vincent would retain sole ownership of everything: the house, vehicles, investment accounts, and Saunders Properties LLC. In exchange, I would receive my personal belongings and custody of Tyler. No alimony, no portion of the business, nothing. Vincent watched me read with a satisfied smirk. "She doesn't need a lawyer," he said to Gerald, not bothering to lower his voice. "She's just a part-time bookkeeper. She wouldn't understand any of this even if she tried." Gerald looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Saunders, I really should advise that your wife retain independent counsel." "Not necessary." Vincent waved his hand dismissively. "Diana knows I built everything. She contributed nothing. Right, Diana?" I closed the folder and met his eyes. "I'll need a few days to review this. Then I'll provide my response." Vincent blinked, clearly expecting immediate surrender. But he recovered quickly, that arrogant smile returning. "Take all the time you need. The outcome won't change." I walked out of that office, and I wasn't a victim. I was a woman with a plan. Within a week, Vincent had rewritten our entire marriage for public consumption. "Diana's being completely unreasonable," I overheard him tell mutual friends at a neighborhood gathering I hadn't been invited to. "I'm offering her a clean break, and she's trying to drag this out, probably hoping to take half my company when she never worked a day for it." The Whisper network moved fast. People I'd known for years suddenly stopped returning calls. A mom from Tyler's school gave me a sympathetic look and said, "I heard about everything. It must be so hard realizing you weren't compatible." Compatible. As if I was the one caught with a 27-year-old mistress. Then came Evelyn's call. "Diana." Her voice carried that particular frost she reserved for people who disappointed her. "I understand you're making this difficult for Vincent. May I remind you that my son built that company from nothing? You were lucky to live in that house, drive those cars, wear the lifestyle he provided. Don't embarrass yourself by pretending you deserve more." "I haven't asked for anything, Evelyn." "Good. Keep it that way. And don't drag this through the courts. It would be humiliating for everyone, especially Tyler." She hung up before I could respond. That same night, I discovered something while reviewing the property records I'd been quietly collecting. Vincent had mortgaged our family home, the house we lived in, without my consent or signature. A second mortgage, taken out 18 months ago. Under Texas law, he needed my approval for that. He didn't have it. I photographed the document, added it to my file, and felt something settle in my chest. Let them think I was weak. Let them think I was beaten. The people who underestimate you always leave the biggest blind spots. Rachel was the one who found Margaret Collins. "She's handled some of the ugliest divorces in Houston," Rachel told me over coffee at a cafe far from our usual spots. "And she wins, not because she's ruthless, because she's thorough." Margaret's office was nothing like Gerald Hoffman's glass tower. It occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian near Montrose, all warm wood and framed credentials. She was in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that assessed me the moment I walked through her door. "Sit down, Mrs. Saunders. Tell me everything." So I did. 3 years of documentation. The debt, the forged signatures, the affair. Vincent's demands. The social pressure. All of it laid out on her desk in organized folders I'd prepared myself. Margaret reviewed each piece methodically, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When she finished, she looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in a long time: respect. "You've done remarkable work here. Most clients come to me in crisis. You've come prepared for war." "I'm not interested in war," I said. "I'm interested in freedom." "Then let me tell you what your options are." She set down her pen, Based on what you've shown me, you could fight for half of everything. Texas is a community property state. You have grounds. Half of 4.7 million in debt? Margaret smiled, the first real smile she'd shown. You understand the situation better than your husband does. I've had 3 years to understand it. He still thinks he's a millionaire. Then let me ask you something. She leaned forward. What do you actually want out of this divorce? I thought about Tyler, about my savings account, about starting over with nothing but my son and my dignity. I want him to get exactly what he's asking for. Margaret studied me for a long moment, then pulled a thick legal textbook from her shelf. Under Texas law, when marital assets are divided in a divorce, the debts attached to those assets can be assigned as well. It's called a liability assumption clause. She opened to a marked page. If one party agrees to take ownership of an asset, they can also be required to assume full responsibility for any liens, mortgages, or debts associated with it. So if Vincent wants everything, then Vincent gets everything, including the $4.7 million in liabilities currently attached to those assets. Margaret's pen traced a line in her notes. The key is ensuring the agreement is explicit and legally binding, and that he signs it voluntarily, with full knowledge of what he's agreeing to. He won't read it carefully, I said. He never does. He already thinks he's won. That's his choice. Margaret closed the book. But we need to protect you legally. There's a document called a waiver of independent review. Essentially, he'll be acknowledging that he had the opportunity to have everything examined by financial experts and chose not to. His lawyer will tell him to get an independent audit. Almost certainly. But will Vincent listen? I thought about my husband, his ego, his certainty, his absolute conviction that he was the smartest person in any room. No, he won't. Then here's what we do. Margaret pulled out a fresh legal pad. We draft an agreement that gives him exactly what he's demanded. The house, the cars, the company, all of it. We include the liability assumption clause on page 47 of a 52-page document, and we wait for him to sign away his own future. And if he reads it, then you're no worse off than you were before. She met my eyes. But I don't think he will. Neither did I. The pressure came from multiple directions at once. Brittany called me first, actually called, not texted, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Diana, hi! I know this is awkward, but I just wanted to reach out woman to woman. She paused for effect. Vincent and I are looking at some properties together, and the financing is getting complicated because of the divorce timeline. If you could just speed things along, it would make everything so much easier. Speed things along, I repeated. You know how it is. We want to start our new chapter, and you're probably ready to move on too, right? It's better for everyone if we can just wrap this up quickly. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. I'll take that under consideration, Brittany. Then Vincent weighed in via email, always documenting himself, never aware of how those words might look later. Diana, my patience is running thin. If you don't sign within 2 weeks, I'll file a motion claiming deliberate delay. Gerald says I have grounds. Don't make this ugly. The threats continued. His lawyer sent formal letters. His mother left voicemails. Even acquaintances started reaching out with helpful advice about accepting reality. But buried in Brittany's phone call was something she probably shouldn't have mentioned. The financing is getting complicated, which meant Vincent needed assets on paper to secure new loans. He was planning to leverage the very properties that were already drowning in debt, probably to fund his new life with Brittany. He wasn't just greedy, he was desperate. I showed the email to Margaret. He's signing a waiver with this kind of documented pressure? She almost laughed. Diana, your husband is building our case for us. I just smiled. Let him keep pushing. Every threat was another nail in his own coffin. The family meeting was Evelyn's idea, naturally. We should settle this like civilized people, she announced, summoning us all to her River Oaks dining room, the one with the Waterford crystal chandelier and the mahogany table that had witnessed 30 years of Saunders family power plays. Vincent sat at the head of the table, Evelyn to his right, a few cousins and an uncle scattered along the sides like a jury. I was placed at the far end, physically marginalized, exactly where they wanted me. Diana has agreed to accept Vincent's terms, Evelyn began, not bothering to let me speak for myself. She'll sign the papers this week and we can all move forward from this unfortunate situation. Vincent smiled magnanimously. I always knew she'd come around. Diana understands she wasn't really equipped for this kind of negotiation. The cousins nodded. The uncle cleared his throat approvingly. I sat with my hands folded, saying nothing. We should acknowledge that Vincent is being extremely generous here, Evelyn continued. He's letting Diana keep Tyler, even though, she waved her hand vaguely, a boy needs his father, traditionally speaking. Tyler is my priority, I said quietly. I just want what's best for him. Then sign the papers, Vincent said. Stop dragging this out. I looked down at my hands, performing the defeated wife they expected to see. You're right, I'll sign. I only wanted to make sure I understood everything. Evelyn beamed. Finally, some sense. You see, Vincent? I told you she'd come around, once she realized she had no other choice. Across the room, I caught Tyler watching from the doorway where the nanny was supposed to keep him occupied. His small face was confused, worried. I smiled at him gently. What nobody in that room understood was that I hadn't surrendered. I just made them think I had. The night before the final hearing, I sat alone in the tiny apartment I'd rented after moving out of the house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a galley kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to stand side by side. But it was clean, it was safe, and it was ours. Mine and Tyler's. My son had fallen asleep an hour earlier, his favorite stuffed elephant tucked under his arm. I watched him breathe for a few minutes, this small person who had become the center of my entire universe, then walked to the kitchen table where my documents were spread out. 3 years of preparation, all of it leading to tomorrow. I reviewed the final agreement one more time. 52 pages. The liability assumption clause buried on page 47, exactly as Margaret and I had planned. The waiver of independent financial review on page 49, everything legal, everything transparent, for anyone who bothered to look. Vincent wouldn't look, I was certain of it. But certainty and reality are different things, and my hands trembled slightly as I closed the folder. On the counter, I'd set out my outfit for tomorrow. A simple gray blazer, white blouse, minimal jewelry. The only piece that mattered was the ring my grandmother had left me. A thin gold band with a tiny sapphire, worth nothing monetarily but everything emotionally. It was the one asset Vincent had never thought to claim. Tyler stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about pancakes. I walked back to his room and sat on the edge of his bed, brushing hair from his forehead. Whatever happens tomorrow, I whispered, we're going to be okay. The words were meant for him, but maybe I needed to hear them too. I didn't sleep much that night, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I want to pause here for a moment, if you don't mind. Before I tell you what happened in that courtroom, I need to say something to anyone listening who might recognize pieces of their own story in mine. If you're in a relationship where you feel controlled, where someone else manages every dollar, makes every decision, treats you like you're invisible or incapable, I want you to know that you're not alone, and you're not crazy for feeling trapped. For 3 years, I stayed silent. Not because I accepted what was happening, but because I was building something in that silence. A plan, a safety net, a way out that no one could take from me. I'm not telling you my path is the right one for everyone. Every situation is different, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. And knowing your own worth doesn't require anyone else to see it. If this story means something to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. A friend, a sister, a coworker who's going through something similar. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that there are options, even when it feels like there aren't. Hit that like button if you want to help more people find this video. And if you're still here, still listening, comment and tell me, have you ever been underestimated? How did you prove them wrong? I'll be reading every single response. Now, back to the morning of the hearing. I dropped Tyler off at Rachel's house, kissed him goodbye, and drove to the courthouse in my old Honda Accord. The Porsche was already in the parking lot when I arrived. Vincent had gotten there early, eager to claim his prize. He had no idea what was waiting for him. The morning of January 3rd was unseasonably warm for Houston. 68 degrees, bright sun cutting through wispy clouds. I stood outside the family courthouse, watching my breath not fog in the air, feeling strangely calm. 3 years of waiting, and it had come down to this. One hearing, one signature, one moment that would determine the rest of my life. My phone buzzed. Margaret, in the building, room 4B, ready when you are. I texted back a simple coming and walked through the glass doors. Inside, the courthouse hummed with the mundane business of endings. Couples signing custody agreements, lawyers shuffling papers, clerks stamping documents that would reshape families forever. Just another Tuesday for everyone except the people whose worlds were changing. I found room 4B at the end of a long hallway. Through the narrow window in the door, I could see Vincent already seated at the respondent's table. Gerald Hoffman beside him, both men reviewing papers with the relaxed posture of people who believed they'd already won. Margaret was waiting for me outside. How are you feeling? Ready. The word came out steady. Is everything in order? Every document filed, every clause triple-checked. She touched my arm briefly, unusual for her, but somehow exactly what I needed. Whatever happens in there, Diana, you should know. Win or lose, you've already proven you're not who they think you are. I'm not trying to prove anything. I met her eyes. I'm just trying to be free. She nodded once, then opened the door. Vincent looked up as I entered. He smiled, that confident, condescending smile I'd seen 1,000 times. Diana, glad you could make it. I took my seat beside Margaret without responding. Let him smile. It wouldn't last long. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, more intimate. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting that hummed faintly overhead, rows of gallery seating that were mostly empty. Mostly. Brittany had claimed a spot in the front row, wearing a red designer dress that probably cost more than my first car. She was texting when I walked in, but looked up long enough to give me a smile that was almost pitying. Beside her sat Evelyn Saunders, immaculate in Chanel, her posture radiating the quiet certainty of a woman who had never been denied anything in her life. They'd come to witness Vincent's triumph, a front-row seat to my humiliation. I settled into my chair and watched my husband from across the aisle. He'd worn his best navy suit, a gold tie clip catching the light. The Rolex gleamed on his wrist. To anyone who didn't know better, he looked like a man in complete control. Gerald Hoffman leaned over to whisper something and I caught fragments. Routine. Just need her signature. Home by lunch. Vincent nodded, barely listening. That was when I noticed something interesting. Gerald's face. There was tension around his eyes, a tightness in his jaw that didn't match his confident words. He kept glancing at the thick document folder between them, then at Vincent, who hadn't touched it. Judge Harriet Dawson presiding, the clerk announced. A woman in her 60s entered from chambers, gray hair pinned back severely, reading glasses perched on her nose. We're here for the matter of Saunders vs. Saunders, final dissolution hearing. She looked up. Counselors, are both parties prepared to proceed? We are, Your Honor, Gerald said. We are, Margaret confirmed. Judge Dawson nodded. Then let's begin. I understand we have a settlement agreement to review. Vincent straightened in his seat, practically glowing with anticipation. Showtime. The agreement was read into the record with the same clinical detachment as a medical diagnosis. Mrs. Saunders agrees to relinquish all claims to the marital residence located at 4521 Willow Creek Drive, the clerk read, as well as all motor vehicles registered to the marriage, including one 2023 Porsche Cayenne and one 2012 Honda Accord. The list went on. Properties, investment accounts, Saunders Properties LLC and all its holdings. Every asset Vincent had demanded, formally transferred to his sole ownership. Brittany squeezed Evelyn's arm, beaming. Judge Dawson looked over her glasses at me. Mrs. Saunders, you understand that by signing this agreement, you are relinquishing your community property rights to these assets? I understand, Your Honor. And you've had adequate time to review this agreement with your counsel? I have. Any questions before we proceed with signatures? No, Your Honor. Gerald Hoffman cleared his throat. Your Honor, I'd like it noted that my client was advised to obtain independent financial review of the marital assets and debts, but has elected to waive that review. Mr. Saunders? Judge Dawson turned to Vincent. Is that accurate? You're waiving your right to have the financials independently verified before signing? Vincent didn't hesitate. I built this company, Your Honor. I know exactly what it's worth. I don't need some accountant telling me what I already know. Then please sign the waiver on page 49. Vincent took Gerald's pen, a Mont Blanc naturally, and signed with a flourish. I watched Gerald's face as Vincent handed back the pen. The attorney was flipping through pages rapidly now, searching for something. His eyes stopped on page 47. The color drained from his face. Vincent, he whispered urgently, reaching for his client's arm. Wait! But Vincent was already turning to page 52, signing his name on the final line. Done, my husband announced. The moment Vincent's pen lifted from the paper, Gerald Hoffman's face went white. I watched it happen in real time, the realization spreading across his features like ice forming on a windshield. His mouth opened slightly, his hand gripped the edge of the table. Vincent, his voice was barely above a whisper. Vincent, we need to stop. What? My husband laughed, sliding the signed document toward the clerk. It's done. She signed, I signed. Let's wrap this up. You don't understand. Gerald was scrambling through the pages now, his professional composure crumbling. Page 47. The liability assumption clause. The what? Judge Dawson held up her hand. Mr. Hoffman, is there an issue? Gerald looked from Vincent to the judge to me, and I could see the exact moment he understood he couldn't undo what had just happened. Your Honor, my client may not have fully understood. Your client, Margaret interrupted smoothly, was asked directly if he wanted independent financial review. He declined. He signed the waiver voluntarily. The agreement is executed. What is everyone talking about? Vincent's voice had lost its confidence. What's on page 47? Gerald handed him the document, his finger pointing to the relevant clause. I watched my husband's eyes move across the text. The party receiving marital assets hereby assumes full personal liability for all debts, liens, mortgages, and financial encumbrances attached to said assets, releasing the other party from any and all obligations related thereto. Vincent's face went gray. This says... He looked up at Gerald, then at me. This says I'm responsible for the debts? All $4.7 million, Margaret confirmed. As of your signature 30 seconds ago. Brittany's voice cut through from the gallery. 4 million what? I sat perfectly still, watching my husband finally understand what he'd just done to himself. Vincent shot to his feet so fast his chair screeched against the floor. This is fraud! His voice echoed through the small courtroom. She tricked me! This whole thing is... She can't do this! Mr. Saunders, sit down. Judge Dawson's tone left no room for negotiation. I'm not sitting down until someone explains how this is legal. Gerald, do something. Gerald Hoffman stood frozen, his face the color of old paper. You signed the waiver, Vincent. You specifically stated you knew what the assets were worth. You refused independent review. Because I thought... Vincent spun toward me. You knew. You knew the whole time. You planned this. I didn't plan anything. My voice came out steady, calm. I just gave you exactly what you asked for. Your Honor, Vincent slammed his palm on the table. I demand this agreement be voided. I was deceived. You were not deceived, Mr. Saunders. Judge Dawson removed her reading glasses, fixing him with a stare that silenced the room. The financial records of your company are public. The debts attached to your properties are matters of record. Your wife's attorney included full disclosure documentation in the agreement packet. You chose not to read it. I didn't know. You signed a waiver stating you didn't need to know. The judge's voice hardened. This court cannot protect parties from their own arrogance. From the gallery, I heard Brittany's voice, high and panicked. Vincent, what does this mean? You said you were a millionaire. Evelyn was already standing, gathering her purse, her face rigid with fury and embarrassment. Mom! Vincent reached toward her. Don't. The single word cut like a knife. She walked out without looking back. Vincent stood in the wreckage of his victory, finally understanding that he hadn't won anything. He'd just inherited his own destruction. In the silence that followed Evelyn's exit, I stood. Vincent turned to me, his face contorted with rage and desperation, emotions I'd never seen him show so openly. For 8 years, he'd been the one in control. Now he was watching that control dissolve like sugar in water. You destroyed me, he whispered. You destroyed everything. I walked to the center of the courtroom, close enough that he could hear me clearly, but far enough to maintain the distance I'd been building for 3 years. No, Vincent, you destroyed yourself. I just stopped cleaning up after you. Diana. For 8 years, you told me I had no value, that I didn't understand business or money or anything important. I kept my voice level, the way I'd practiced in front of my bathroom mirror on nights when I couldn't sleep. You said I was just a part-time bookkeeper. You said Tyler was a burden. You said I should be grateful you let me stay. His mouth opened, but no words came. I'm not grateful. I touched my grandmother's ring, drawing strength from the small, familiar weight. I'm free, and for the first time in 8 years, I can finally breathe. I turned to Margaret, who was already packing her briefcase with quiet efficiency. Then I looked back at Vincent one final time. I don't hate you. I'm not even angry anymore. I just refuse to let you define who I am for one more second. Diana, wait. We can fix this. We can… No! The word was final, complete. There's nothing left to fix. I walked out of the courtroom, my footsteps steady on the tile floor. Behind me, I heard Vincent calling my name, heard Gerald trying to calm him down, heard Brittany demanding explanations. But I didn't look back. I was already gone. I was halfway down the courthouse hallway when the shouting started. Through the glass doors of room 4B, I could see Brittany standing in Vincent's path, her face flushed, her carefully applied makeup starting to run. $4.7 million. Her voice carried clearly into the corridor. You told me the company was worth 10 times that. You said we were going to buy a house in the Galleria, travel to Europe, start a family. Brittany, listen. Vincent reached for her arm. She yanked away. Don't touch me. God, I can't believe I fell for this. My father was right about you. Your father cut you off. Because I chose you over him. She laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound. And now I find out you're not even a real millionaire? You're worse than broke. You're negative broke. Margaret appeared beside me, watching the scene unfold with professional detachment. I've seen a lot of divorces, Diana. This might be the most complete implosion I've witnessed in real time. I didn't plan for this part. I meant it. Watching Vincent's mistress abandon him felt less satisfying than I'd expected. Just exhausting, like watching the final act of a play that had gone on too long. Through the glass, Brittany was already walking away, heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. She pulled out her phone as she passed us, not even glancing in my direction. Daddy? It's me. I made a huge mistake. Can I come home? Vincent appeared in the doorway, looking like a man who'd just watched his entire world collapse, which I suppose he had. Our eyes met across the hallway. I felt nothing but relief. "Goodbye, Vincent," I said quietly. Then I walked toward the exit, toward my son, toward whatever came next. Freedom had never felt so simple. 3 months after the hearing, Vincent's empire finished crumbling. I heard about it through Rachel, who still had connections at various banks in the city. The details arrived in fragments over coffee, like dispatches from a distant war. The house sold first, $580,000, which wasn't enough to cover the mortgage and second lien. Vincent walked away still owing $320,000 on a property he'd lost. The Porsche was repossessed by the financing company 2 weeks later. The repo man came at 3 in the morning, according to a neighbor who witnessed it. Vincent apparently stood in his driveway in his bathrobe, screaming about lawsuits and wrongful seizure until someone threatened to call the police. Saunders Properties LLC filed for Chapter 7, bankruptcy, in March. The commercial properties Vincent had been so proud of went to auction, where they sold for a fraction of their original purchase prices. The remaining debt, nearly $3 million, stayed with him. He had to move out of the house before the sale closed, Rachel told me. Found a studio apartment in a complex off 290. No doorman, no pool, no anything, really. I nodded, processing the information without satisfaction. And his job? Some small brokerage firm hired him, commission only. Rachel shook her head. From CEO to entry-level sales in 90 days. That's got to be some kind of record. I thought about the man I'd married. His confidence, his ambition, his absolute certainty that he was destined for greatness. I thought about all the times he'd told me I didn't understand business, didn't understand money, didn't understand anything. He did this to himself, I said finally. I just stopped protecting him from the consequences. Rachel squeezed my hand across the table. You know what? That's the best kind of revenge, the kind you don't even have to take. Summer arrived, and with it, a new beginning. Our apartment had transformed over the months from a temporary refuge into something that felt like home. Tyler's drawings covered the refrigerator. Plants crowded the windowsill, herbs I'd started growing to save money on groceries and kept because they made me happy. The living room had a second-hand couch that was more comfortable than any piece of furniture in Vincent's showcase house. I returned to accounting full-time in April, a mid-level position at a firm that valued competence over pedigree. By June, I'd been promoted to senior accountant. My boss said I had exceptional attention to detail. I didn't tell her I'd developed that skill tracking a fraudulent husband for 3 years. Tyler was thriving too. He'd made friends at his new school, joined a soccer team, started reading chapter books before bed. He rarely asked about his father anymore, not because I discouraged it, but because the questions had simply stopped mattering to him. "Mom, watch me!" he shouted from across the park, attempting a cartwheel that ended in a pile of giggles. I applauded from my bench, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: uncomplicated happiness. My phone buzzed. A notification from the community college. I'd been accepted into their evening CPA certification program. Classes started in September. "What are you smiling about?" Tyler asked, running over to flop down beside me. "Good news, buddy. Mom's going back to school." "Like me?" "Exactly like you." He thought about this for a moment. "Can we celebrate with ice cream?" "Absolutely." We walked to the shop on the corner, hand in hand, and I realized something that surprised me. This small life, this modest apartment, this ordinary job, this simple joy, was everything I'd never known I wanted. And it was entirely my own. I want to take another moment here, if that's okay. We're almost at the end of this story, but before we get there, I have a question for you. Have you ever made a decision that everyone around you thought was insane? Have you ever trusted yourself when no one else did? Because that's really what this story is about. Not revenge, not karma, not watching someone get what they deserve. It's about the quiet voice inside you that knows the truth, even when the noise of everyone else's opinions tries to drown it out. For 3 years, I listened to that voice. I planned. I prepared. I kept my mouth shut when everyone expected me to argue or beg or fall apart, and when the moment came, I was ready. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because I know there's someone watching right now who needs to hear it. Your silence isn't weakness. Your patience isn't passivity. And the people who underestimate you? They're giving you the greatest gift possible, time to prepare while they're too busy feeling superior to notice. So here's my challenge to you. If you know someone who's in the middle of their own silent battle, a friend, a family member, anyone who might need to hear that their planning will pay off, share this video with them. And if this story has meant something to you, take a second to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps these stories reach more people who might need them. Now, let me tell you what happened when Vincent finally reached out to me, a year after everything fell apart. Because that's when I learned something unexpected. About him, about myself, and about what forgiveness actually means. We're almost at the end. Stay with me. The text came on a Tuesday evening, almost exactly 1 year after the final hearing. I need to talk to you, it's about Tyler. I stared at my phone for a long moment, thumb hovering over the delete button. Then curiosity, or maybe something softer, made me type back, public place. Tomorrow, noon. The cafe on Westheimer. He agreed. I almost didn't recognize Vincent when he walked in. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by khakis and a polo shirt that hung looser than it should have. He'd lost weight, not in a healthy way. His face looked tired, the confidence drained from his features. He sat down across from me without ordering anything. "You look good," he said. "You look happy." "I am." Silence stretched between us. He stared at his hands. "I'm not here to apologize," he finally said. "I know you wouldn't believe me if I did. I'm here because—" He took a breath. "I've been in therapy. For 6 months. And my therapist says I need to take accountability for what I did. To you. To Tyler." I waited. "I was a terrible husband. And a worse father." The words came out like they physically hurt him. "I treated you like you didn't matter. I treated our son like an afterthought. I was so obsessed with my own image that I couldn't see what I was destroying." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to see Tyler." He met my eyes for the first time. "Not to get back at you or prove anything. I want to try to be his father. A real father. If you'll let me." I studied the man I'd once loved, searching for the arrogance I'd learned to navigate. I didn't find it. "I'll consider it," I said. "On conditions." That night, after Tyler was asleep, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, scared, uncertain, convinced that silence was her only option. I thought about the woman I was now, still quiet, but no longer afraid, still careful, but no longer trapped. Vincent wanted back into Tyler's life. 6 months ago, I would have said no without hesitation. But something in his eyes today had been different. Something broken that was trying to rebuild itself. I couldn't heal him. That wasn't my job anymore. But Tyler deserved to know his father, or at least the father Vincent was trying to become. So I set my conditions. Monthly therapy sessions, verified by his counselor, steady employment for 6 months minimum. Supervised visits first, progressing only if Tyler felt comfortable. And one absolute rule: he would never, ever speak about me negatively in front of our son. Vincent agreed to everything. I didn't know if he'd follow through. People promise change all the time and deliver nothing. But I'd learned something important over the past 3 years. Boundaries aren't about controlling other people's behavior. They're about protecting your own peace. I pulled out my journal, something my own therapist had suggested I start, and wrote a few lines. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. You choose who walks through them. I chose to give Vincent a door. Whether he walks through it as a better man is up to him. Either way, Tyler and I will be okay. The tea had gone cold, but I didn't mind. I sat there a while longer, watching stars emerge through Houston's light pollution, and let myself feel something I'd almost forgotten was possible. Hope. September arrived with the smell of fresh notebooks and new beginnings. Tyler started first grade the same week I started my CPA certification classes. We developed a routine, homework together at the kitchen table, him practicing his letters while I studied tax law. Sometimes we'd quiz each other. He usually won. "What's 4 plus 6?" I'd ask. 10. "What's the difference between assets and liabilities?" I'd laugh. "Where did you learn that word?" "From you. You say it in your sleep sometimes." Work was going well. My boss had mentioned the possibility of partnership track if I continued performing at my current level and finished my certification. For the first time in my adult life, I was building something that belonged entirely to me. Rachel came by one evening with a bottle of wine. The good kind, not the sale rack kind we used to split in college. "I have news," she announced, settling onto my second-hand couch. "Your ex-husband paid off one of his smaller debts last month. First voluntary payment he's made since the bankruptcy." I took a sip of my wine. "That's good. For him." "Aren't you curious about the details?" "Not particularly." Rachel studied me for a moment, then smiled. "You really are over it, aren't you?" I was over it the day I walked out of that courtroom. I looked around my modest apartment, the plants, the drawings, the evidence of a life built from scratch. I just didn't know what came next. Now I do. The next morning, Tyler and I walked to school together, his hand warm in mine. "Mom?" he asked as we reached the gates. "Are you happy?" I knelt down to his level, adjusting his backpack straps. "Yes, baby, I really am." He smiled, that beautiful, uncomplicated smile that made everything worthwhile, and ran toward his classroom. I stood watching until he disappeared inside. Then I walked toward my future. Before I end this story, I want to share something my therapist helped me understand about Vincent, about myself, and maybe about someone you know. Vincent wasn't born cruel. He was raised to believe that being a man meant being in control of money, of decisions, of everything and everyone around him. His father was the same way, and his father before that. When his business started failing, he couldn't admit it. Not to me, not to his family, not even to himself. Because in his mind, admitting failure meant admitting he wasn't a real man. So he doubled down, took on more debt, projected more confidence, and when the pressure became unbearable, he found someone new, someone who didn't know the truth, who could reflect back the successful image he so desperately needed to see. Understanding this doesn't excuse what he did, it just explains it. And honestly, it helped me stop taking it personally. His cruelty was never really about me. It was about his own fear of being seen as weak. As for me, I had my own patterns to confront. I avoided conflict because I watched my parents' marriage implode in screaming matches and slammed doors. I thought silence meant peace. I didn't realize I was confusing peace with paralysis. What I learned through all of this is that silence can be powerful, but only when it's a choice, not a cage. Planning is valuable, but so is knowing when to act. And your worth doesn't depend on whether the people around you recognize it. If there's a lesson here, it's this. The people who underestimate you are building their own traps. You don't have to do anything but stay ready. So, that's my story. A woman who was told she didn't matter, who spent 3 years proving that she did. Not to anyone else, but to herself. If this meant something to you, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one, and check out the description for related videos, more stories about people who were counted out and ended up on top. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here until the end. I'm Diana, and I hope wherever you are, whatever you're facing, you know that you're stronger than they think. You just might not have found your moment yet, but you will.